Good evening to you. In business news at this hour, a recent survey has revealed that half of the small businesses in South Africa may not survive the next year without urgent support. The Small Business Growth Index score by Absa has revealed that only 1 in 4 businesses reported growth, while 52.8% say they are contracting, trading with difficulty, or at risk of closure. Transport, utilities and raw materials are the most volatile. At the same time, over 75% of businesses plan to raise prices by between 6 and 10% in the months ahead due to the mounting cost pressures. Now, Head of Strategic Business Development at Absa Business Banking, Lindo Mbanjwa, speaks to us about the survey findings. Thank you so much for your time, Lindo. Let's first unpack really the underlying issues around this very slow growth when it comes to the SME sector in South Africa.
Good evening, and good evening to your listeners as well. Thank you for having us as Absa. So look, I think between ourselves, Saki and the BMR, we've had a collective vision, essentially, just to basically go and look at the small business space within which, obviously, the small businesses in South Africa operate. And I think what's very important for us there is just getting a better understanding of, let's call it, all the environmental factors that kind of impact these small businesses and how they operate. And I guess ultimately what we aim to do here with this survey, to the, I suppose, the reflections that you've made around the figures that are quite startling in terms of the challenges that they face, is to be that voice of these small businesses, to foster, let's call it, a policy change in terms of how we can implement actionable items, in terms of how we enable them to kind of really survive under these tough conditions. So now you made mention of a few things here. I mean, a lot of these businesses, 60% of them have cited the fact that they're struggling on the cash flow management front. And those are some of the things that we need to look at a lot more closer in terms of how we as academic institutions, financial institutions and government enable them to manage the challenges that they face. I think cost inflation is also another major problem that's been cited on this survey, where there are concerns, especially around the wages and the input costs that you mentioned, which obviously put a lot of pressure on these businesses for them to be able to kind of survive. I think another thing that's critical and key to touch on here, obviously, is the fact that there's more than half of these businesses have shown quite a bit of stagger in their confidence levels around being able to survive the next 6 months. So it becomes quite key that as we look at what we implement in terms of what we envision will enable them from a recommendations perspective, we focus on exactly those things in terms of what we change so that we can enable them a little bit better.
It paints a very concerning picture, and my next question really is about the state of the SME sector in South Africa. Is it then an indicator of going into business to fail, especially where there's no support?
So I don't think we should ever look at it as an indicator that it's going into business to fail. I think as, let's call it, established corporates, academia, and also government, we need to take a look at the insights that we are getting from this report. We need to understand exactly what we can do. And I think there's quite a few recommendations that have been made there for us to be able to create an enabling and a conducive environment to enable these SMEs. And I mean, some of those things speak to us looking at some of the recommendations we can make from a policy perspective in terms of how we reduce barriers to access to capital. I think us as financial institutions as well need to reflect on our own internal policies in terms of looking at our credit standards and how we can relook how we look at small business to ensure that they have actually got access to capital. And additionally, I think at a government level, I think we'll take some of the insights that we've gotten from here and kind of go to government and say, look, from a regulatory perspective, these are the challenges that the SMEs are facing. How do we relook and reshape how we show up in terms of streamlining those elements so that we can actually create, again, what I call an enabling and conducive environment for SMEs to thrive? I think ultimately as well, one of the things that we've picked up, which is a gap as well, within the survey is more so around, let's call it, the skills gaps that exist for SMEs. How do we make training accessible to them? One of the findings in the survey itself suggests that a lot of them don't even know where to go for these type of things. So again, these are things that are there, they are available, meaning that we can get SMEs in a space, in an environment where they're able to actually perform better, thrive, and start turning the tough times around. I mean, if you look at developed economies, we also need to understand that when you look at the developed economies, the businesses that actually drive the economies there are small business. So it's critical that we get these things right within South Africa so that we can start creating a conducive environment that ultimately creates jobs for the majority. And lastly, I think also we've got a key role to play from an advisory perspective to ensure that that failure rate is reduced.
Absolutely, and those recommendations are sounding positive and will be much needed, especially when the localization debate is intensifying, given that the South African trade market needs to look within with regards to the impact of the U.S. Trade tariffs. How ready is industry, particularly on the financing side of small businesses, to ensure that we are not only talking about the reforms that are required, but they are implemented?
So look, I think the tariffs that have been announced by President Trump don't really inspire confidence for a lot of businesses, more particularly small businesses, right? And we understand that the impact that they'll have on our economy is not necessarily the greatest. So I don't speak as an economist here, but I think just citing some of the commentators that have kind of spoken on this topic, we just need to understand exactly, I suppose, which businesses are heavily impacted by these tariffs. And I think some of the areas that they've touched on are like the agri sector, more specifically when you think of things like citrus and the automotive sector. And again, I think for me, what's promising there is the fact that at a government level, the president has kind of pronounced on the fact that the government is working on finalizing a package to support some of these vulnerable businesses on these reciprocal tariffs. I think us as obviously the financial institutions as well need to reflect on how, especially from a trade finance perspective, we look at how we can restructure the way we do things to assist these businesses as they tackle these tough challenges of the tariffs that are obviously going to be coming in due course. And ultimately, again, it becomes about the collaboration between private and public sector to see how we collaborate using all the information that we're getting, especially from surveys of this nature, to create an enabling environment, to make sure that we drive policy change that assists the businesses, more specifically the more vulnerable ones, which we are calling the small businesses. Because ultimately, if you look at where the jobs are going to come from, this is the sector of business where jobs are going to come from. This is the sector of business where we need to start putting a bit of fuel and injection into your township economies and also your rural economies as well.
Thank you so much for your input. Lindo Mbanjwa is talking to us there from Absa Business Banking about their latest findings when it comes to the trade of small, medium enterprises.